And for more on this, we're now being joined live by security analyst Dr. Elizabeth Laris from Taipei, Taiwan. We also have with us our correspondent Kripa, who's joining us in the newsroom. Thank you both for joining us. Now, Dr. Laris, let me come to you first. These are fateful moments in the turbulent history of the Islamic Republic of Iran, but its clerics and commanders have been preparing for it. With Khamenei's death, questions have quickly turned to his successor and also whether a change at the top could also signal perhaps an ideological shift in the direction for the 47-year-old Islamic Republic. What are the possible scenarios, according to you, that can play out henceforth?
Well, certainly the leadership, and that is the jurists, the Ayatollahs have a contingency plan. One of them might be Khamenei's son. He might come to power. There's a couple of other names, out there that are quite significant, and it depends on where they stand. The next leader needs to be selected by the 88-member Assembly of Experts, which have been clearly and very closely vetted for their Islamic, beliefs. So they are in Western, terms, hardliners. So they're probably going to choose a hardliner. Whoever comes after Khamenei, really is going to have to watch his back because the United States has made it clear that the purpose of the operation, number one, is to annihilate Iran's nuclear weapons program, but also for regime change. And so the U.S. is not going to tolerate more of the same. Matter of fact, President Trump, in his address, encouraged the Iranian people to rise up. He essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is your day. This is your time. If you don't do it now, it's not going to happen for one or more generations. So, it appears that President Trump is not going to tolerate more of the same. And so if more of the same comes to power, then we probably will see an even longer engagement.
Absolutely, and Khamenei's death in such violent circumstances heralds perhaps a new and uncertain future both in Iran and the wider region. And given that he has kept a firm grip on the levers of power in Iran. And on that, I would also like to cut across to our correspondent Kripa to get us the latest updates from Iran and how are the Iranians reacting to it.
As we track the latest developments at this hour, let's start with Iran's reaction. Of course, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian says that the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is a great crime and will, quote, never remain unanswered. And he's also declared 7 days of public holidays and 40 days of mourning in the nation. And thousands are mourning the death in the capital of Iran, in Tehran, of course. And he was the highest authority in the country. He was above the president, of course, and commanding the armed forces. He was steering foreign policy. He was maintaining the entire face of Iran in the world. And he had held power since 1989, which is longer than any living Middle East leader. So definitely, if his killing has been publicly announced by the state media, then it has a lot of repercussions and a lot of commotion in the capital.
Right. Thanks, Kripa, for getting us all those details. Now, President Trump has argued that Iran had rejected every opportunity that it was presented, to make concessions on the nuclear program. But we also understand that it is a decisive, it is a risk that Trump has taken on, and the bet is absolutely enormous because if Trump claims a victory here, then it is one for the history books. But if the military strike fails, it is going to spark a wider, regional conflagration, which could hurt Trump's chances at the midterm elections. Dr. Laris, how do you think he's going to balance this?
I think it's going to be difficult. So you can see that in America, a lot of members of Congress, the U.S. Senate, are quite divided over this. They're annoyed. Of course, the opposition is annoyed that President Trump did not invoke, War Powers, Act. He is using the term war. According to U.S. Constitution, it is the Congress that declares war, but Congress has not declared war since 1941. It authorizes military action, but Trump didn't even go to Congress to do that. As a matter of fact, Congress is not in session right now. Mike Johnson would have to bring the House back in to even vote on this. And it's interesting that, some people now are saying, hey, this is against international law. Others are saying, hey, Iran has been essentially attacking U.S. bases, our allies for many years. We even gave them a whole bunch of money to come back to the table to suspend their nuclear, program, and they just invested it in their nuclear program. And so, really, the politics are divided on this. What I'm hearing is Privately, a lot of people are cheering this on, but publicly they can't come out and say so. So publicly they're saying, well, like, you know, let's all call for peace. Everybody wants peace, right? That's what they're all going to come out and say right now.
Right, and as the world awaits to see what the Iranian regime will do after the death of the supreme leader, it also remains to be seen if Trump will be able to avoid a prolonged, conflict here. And it's also an open question whether he can convince the American public, and especially his MAGA base here, who largely oppose U.S. intervention abroad, to support another incursion in the Middle East. How do you anticipate him tackling this? As you've just mentioned that, people have been divided on the issue. Dr. Laris, I would like you to take this one. How do you anticipate
Is the question addressed to me?
Please go ahead, Dr. Laris.
Yeah, it all depends. Okay, so President Trump was very clear. He said this is a major engagement. He used the term war, right? And the United States has been trying to get out of what's called forever wars. And so here you've got, a president that very likely got us into yet another one. So it really depends on how much the U.S., really in concert with Israel, is able now to respond. Remember back in June, Israel, with the help of the United States, was able to soften up Iran. It's not just its military, but the Iranian Guard, which is a larger military than the state military. So they have been softened up, but they still obviously have some punch left in them. I think it's going to be long, especially for Israel. And the United States is, of course, going to come to the defense of Israel. So I think that's where it's going to be protracted. And, this is only like early spring in Washington. Midterms right now are really far away. And so it just, it remains to be seen. If I were an English literature major, I would say the plot thickens.
Right, Dr. Laris, and demonstrators across the United States are taking to the streets to protest this attack on Iran. Now, Iran's retaliatory strikes on a host of U.S. allies in the region have also signaled the regime's plan to fight back more aggressively, perhaps, than they did the last time. And also a protracted conflict in the Middle East, as you just mentioned, which could impact Trump's other priorities in the region as well, be it rebuilding Gaza or strengthening ties with Saudi Arabia. While it could also alienate supporters back home at a time when the president's approval ratings have taken a hammering. Now, how calculated of a risk do you think it is, Dr. Laris?
What I want to say is, the Trump administration did really go to its security allies and partners in the region before it made a move. I cannot believe there was any leader in the Gulf that did not know this was coming. You do not send aircraft carriers, you do not divert them from the Asia Pacific, which is a priority for the United States, to the Middle East if you're not going to use them. Interestingly, a lot of the Gulf states were, quietly on board because they have not come out and condemned this. Right. And then Europe is a bit mixed. Our allies are saying, ooh, shouldn't have done that, but we're really glad the guy's gone. Now let's get back to the table and let's talk about peace. But I think it's really very interesting. Look, all the intelligence agencies in the Middle East, the Khamenei was going to be at this meeting. Why it was a surprise that the U.S. took him out during this meeting, during Ramadan and then Shabbat. Well, George Washington crossed the Delaware and attacked the British at Trenton on Christmas Day. So it's not like the United States is above doing stuff like this. And if it didn't have the blessing of our allies, it certainly had their knowledge.
Right, and Trump told Axios that, and I'm quoting him here, I can go long and take over the whole thing or end it in 2 to 3 days perhaps. Now, people are arguing that these remarks highlight what critics say is Trump's freewheeling approach when it comes to foreign policy, and also his disinterest in laying the groundwork to bring lawmakers and the public on the board before launching military attacks. Now, it's that same unconventional approach that the president's allies say has allowed him to notch up successes, including the agreed ceasefire in Gaza and an increased European financial commitment to NATO. Would you agree with that assessment? Dr. Laris, do you think that is the approach? Right.
Yeah, I certainly think that a lot of people in the United States are giving Trump their support when he is winning, right? When he took Maduro out of Venezuela, when he essentially took back control of the Panama Canal from Hong Kong Chinese companies. A lot of people, consider this as a boss move, and they're giving him a lot of leeway. Certainly his critics. He's also giving his critics a lot of fodder, saying this is how a dictator acts. He acts unilaterally and he doesn't get the support of Congress. He could have gone to Congress, maybe would have gotten the support. The GOP majority in the Senate and the House is razor thin. It only takes a couple of people to defect. And then he wouldn't have been able to go forward with this. So he went ahead and did it, and he's just going to say, okay, let's see how the chips fall here. But he's ready to be engaged for a while. He did not dance around that one.
Right, Dr. Laris, and Trump also said that when we're finished, take over your government, it will be yours to take. This was, of course, addressed to the Iranian people. And it's being presented as, a chance which comes once in a generation. And I just want to understand from you, is it as straightforward as it seems? Is it really about giving power back to the people and to make that decisions? Or are we also seeing some vested interests, as you've just mentioned, Venezuela? And of course, I'm not drawing straight parallels here, but of course, this does resonate a little with what we've seen there. Do you think there are some vested interests that shall come to the fore in the coming weeks?
I believe so. One thing that his supporters like about President Trump is he does follow through, right? And he's talked about these dictatorships for a while. And, he sees an opportunity and he moves. The United States has danced around this for 20 years. Because it is a serious issue, and because we know, Iran isn't just going to sit down and take it, and they're probably going to direct most of their fire at Israel, which is a U.S. ally. And so a lot of Americans are, saying again, like Iranian people, just like the Venezuelan people, this is your chance. There is, there are two major strains really in U.S. foreign policy, and the dominant, strain is of course realism, and that is you pick and choose your battles and you pull off what you can do. But it is very often intertwined with human rights issues. You do not hear President Trump talk a lot about human rights, especially the way that Reagan did. You hear Trump talk a lot about peace through strength, and even in his address the other night, he was talking about it. But there also is this underlying current of human rights. And the idea is the people came out in Iran, they protested, over several weeks. Even the official count coming out of Iran was like 30,000 people were killed. And then afterwards, many executed. That didn't go down well in the United States. And so, you put that with the idea that, we can get this done. This is the time to do this. We don't want to wait until Iran has nuclear warheads and then you can't do a thing. Like you really can't do anything about North Korea. So let's not let it get to that point.